Rhaegar Targaryen had tasted death once, or so the maesters said. When Robert Baratheon's warhammer came crashing down during the Battle of the Trident, the Crown Prince had felt his ribs shatter. The shriek of metal against metal drowned out the chaos for a single heartbeat, and the world became a single tapestry of pain and swirling light. Water rushed in around him, blood blossoming like crimson flowers on the surface of the ford, and he was sure his last breath had escaped him. It was said that the rubies from his breastplate scattered in the shallows, glimmering in the muddy waters as soldiers grappled and screamed around them. Some claimed to have seen Rhaegar's corpse borne downstream, eyes glassy and unseeing, while others thought the prince's spirit rose from that watery grave like a mist. Yet Rhaegar Targaryen did not die. The man the realm believed dead awakened on the northern bank of the river, choking and sputtering, his body covered in bruises and deep cuts, but alive. The fighting raged on around him that day, and even after the Targaryen forces were routed and forced to flee, very few realized that the prince they so cherished was clinging to life. He was taken away in secret, rushed by loyal guardsmen who would defend him unto their own deaths. These men, sworn to Rhaegar since his youth, believed the Crown Prince still had a destiny to fulfill, a destiny whispered of in half-forgotten prophecies and scrawled in musty tomes in the Red Keep. They carried him far from the battlefield, binding his wounds as best they could, ensuring that none would know he had survived until the time was right. As the rebellion pressed forward and as King's Landing braced for the whirlwind that was Robert Baratheon's wrath, Rhaegar was hidden in the shadows of a small keep loyal to the Targaryen name, drifting in and out of feverish dreams. In those dreams, he often saw Lyanna Stark. Her laughter echoed in his mind's corridors like a melody he was certain only he could hear. The promise of her eyes, gray like an oncoming storm, gave him the strength to endure each wave of agony that racked his broken body. The memories he'd gathered in secret, moments stolen from the watchful eyes of the court, from the glare of those who would never understand, resurfaced now like treasures in the darkness. He remembered their flight from the tourney at Harrenhal, that swift unraveling of old alliances and forging of new destinies. He remembered how her hair, dark as midnight, would tangle in the wind as she turned her face to him, the ghost of a smile lighting her stern features. Above all, he remembered the vow they had spoken in hushed tones. They would stand against whatever storm came, side by side. In the gloom of that hidden chamber, his wounds barely tended, the fever clung to Rhaegar, threatening to drag him deeper into oblivion. Maester Donnell, an older man whose loyalty to the Targaryen line ran deeper than any vow, tended to the prince with trembling hands. He used every poultice and every tincture he knew, coaxing Rhaegar to drink bitter concoctions that would purge the infection from his torn flesh. Often, Rhaegar's eyes flickered open with the dull gleam of delirium, and he whispered Lyanna's name as though it were the only word he remembered. The guards who stood watch at his door exchanged uneasy glances, for they knew the name Stark was entwined with scandal and war. But they held their tongues. They had pledged themselves to Rhaegar, and Rhaegar alone, and that was all that mattered. When at last the fever broke, nearly a moon's turn after the battle, Rhaegar awoke with the dim memory that his father's realm was on the verge of collapse. Word reached the keep in snatches and fragments. Robert Baratheon's rebels had mustered great strength, and Tywin Lannister, that most calculating of lords, had seized the opportunity to march upon King's Landing. Aerys Targaryen was said to be barricaded within the Red Keep, a madness in his eyes that no one dared contradict. The city's gates had been opened by turncloaks, and the streets now ran red with the blood of the king's loyalists. Knowing that the capital had fallen left Rhaegar with an ache far deeper than any physical wound. It was an ache that reminded him of the cost of his father's tyranny, and he admitted bitterly of his own failings. He had not stopped any of it. He had not been there to mitigate the king's cruelty, to protect the innocents who now lay dead among the streets. And above all, he had not been there for Lyanna. Despair threatened to consume him, but something sharper edged in. A need to reclaim what was lost, to forge a new destiny from the shards of the old. Despite his weakened state, Rhaegar demanded that those loyal to him rally what forces they could. He would not cower in hiding. He was still the crown prince, and the realm had to know there was another way forward, one free from the shadows of madness and the cycle of hatred. To do that, he needed Lyanna by his side. He believed, with a faith that bordered on the reckless, that their union might still be the key to uniting the realm. Their child, the one he had foreseen in ancient prophecy, was meant to be a symbol of hope, not a harbinger of war. That hope burned in him like a brand, refusing to be extinguished. Months earlier, he had hidden Lyanna away in a tower deep in the Dornish marches, protected by the most honorable of the king's guard. Arthur Dayne and Oswell Wynn had stood watch, while Lord Commander Gerald Hightower journeyed back and forth to keep Rhaegar informed. If Rhaegar had indeed perished, the plan had been for Lyanna to remain sequestered there, unseen and protected, until it was safe for her to return to Winterfell if she ever could. But Rhaegar was alive, and the realm was in tatters. There was no time to linger, no time to brood on what might have been. He gathered his meager retinue, those knights, guards, and healers still loyal, and set out for the Tower of Joy. Traveling across the war-torn countryside took every ounce of strength Rhaegar could muster. The roads were treacherous, dotted with outlaws and broken men who cared little for banners or royal blood. Each day, the group advanced only a few leagues, moving under the cover of darkness to avoid the roving bands of soldiers who might recognize the prince. More than once, Rhaegar was forced to rely on the skill of his loyal knights to parley with suspicious locals, assuring them they meant no harm. Even in the quiet hours, though, the prince could not rest. His ribs still ached, his wounds still pulsed with pain, and he was plagued by anxious dreams of an iron throne drenched in flame, of a girl with wild gray eyes standing alone in a field of blood. By the time they reached the outskirts of the Tower of Joy, Rhaegar felt his heart pounding in his ears as though he were once again at the Trident. The sight of the tall, pale tower against the stormy sky brought a tightness to his chest that no painkiller could dull. On the approach, the guards stationed outside recognized him immediately, shock warring with relief. They quickly bowed, and one of them disappeared inside to fetch Arthur Dayne. The Sword of the Morning emerged moments later, his face etched with awe and something like fierce joy. He had believed Rhaegar was lost, like the rest of the realm did, but here stood the man he had pledged to protect since boyhood. Without a word, Arthur Dayne knelt, and Rhaegar placed a trembling hand on his friend's shoulder. No more needed to be said. They led him inside through narrow corridors of stone that climbed steadily upward. Every step jarred his wounded body, but he pressed on. They reached a modest chamber at the tower's summit where Lyanna Stark lay on a bed of simple linens, looking pale as snow under the feeble glow of a single lantern. Gerald Hightower was at her bedside, along with the maester who had been tending to her. At the sound of footsteps, Lyanna turned her head slowly, her hair spread across the pillow. The moment her gaze found Rhaegar's, her lips parted in disbelief. He could see the same storm of emotion in her eyes that churned within him, relief, fear, love, and a sorrow that neither had words for. Rhaegar sank to his knees beside her bed, ignoring the pain that shot up his side. He touched her hand, feeling how thin her fingers were, how fragile she seemed beneath his touch. He breathed her name, voice cracking as he whispered an apology for not returning sooner, for letting the realm fall into war and chaos, for allowing her to be trapped in this tower while he nearly died on a battlefield that accomplished nothing but more death. Lyanna's gaze flickered from confusion to tenderness. Her free hand rose to his cheek, and she brushed away tears he hadn't realized he was shedding. She tried to speak, but her voice was faint. She managed to ask how he had survived, and all Rhaegar could do was close his eyes and shake his head. He told her of the loyal guardsmen who had carried him away from the Trident, of the fever that nearly claimed him, of how the capital had fallen in his absence, and of the uncertain fate that awaited them. He felt an urgent need to reassure her, to pledge that he would find a way to restore order to the kingdom, to break the chains of hatred that had festered between the North and the Crown. But he was acutely aware that such promises might be beyond his power. The Targaryen dynasty had been shattered by his father's madness and by his own missteps. Yet Lyanna surprised him. Weak though she was, she bore a stubborn resolve in her eyes, a spark of the wolf spirit that had first drawn him to her. She spoke in halting sentences about how the child she carried would need a realm worth inheriting, that they couldn't allow Robert's rebellion to go unchecked, nor could they allow the Targaryen name to be synonymous with cruelty and fire. If the world believed Rhaegar dead, perhaps they could use that rumor to their advantage. She told him that the last of the Kingsguard here were more than just protectors, they were symbols of oaths, of honor. If Rhaegar could rally the good men left in Westeros, if he could show them he was not like his father, then maybe, just maybe, they could shape a new future. The conversation left Rhaegar trembling with renewed purpose. Her voice, though faint, lit a fire in him. In that quiet tower, with the desert wind howling outside and the ghosts of war swirling in the distant hills, they resolved to attempt the impossible. The next day, Rhaegar's men and the Kingsguard set about planning. They knew that if the realm learned the Crown Prince was alive, Robert Baratheon would spare no effort to finish what he started on the Trident. They knew that the Lannisters, having already betrayed the Targaryens once, might strike again if they saw political gain. And they knew that the small folk had been taught to fear the dragons, thanks in large part to Aerys' tyrannical reign. This was not a simple matter of marching an army to King's Landing. They had to win hearts, to prove there was an alternative to endless bloodshed. Lyanna had her own ideas. She insisted that once she recovered enough strength, she would stand by Rhaegar's side publicly. She would declare that she had not been kidnapped, that their love was mutual, and that their marriage, for they had taken the vows in secret, was legitimate. The North might hate her for forsaking her betrothal to Robert, but they would see that she had not been taken against her will. If the realm could believe that there was a genuine bond uniting Stark and Targaryen, perhaps the fires of hatred could be cooled. Rhaegar feared that brandishing such a truth too suddenly would only inflame the rebels, especially the Starks, but Lyanna's determination burned as bright as any dragon's flame. She argued that clarity was their greatest weapon. Rhaegar found he could not help but trust her. In the weeks that followed, Lyanna gradually regained strength. Maester Hightower's potions fortified her body, and Rhaegar helped feed her what little fresh food they could procure in the stony hinterlands around the tower. Each day, they walked the ramparts together, Rhaegar's arm around her to steady her, talking in hushed tones about the shape of the war and what might be done. Arthur Dayne and Oswell went drilled the few men they had, forging them into a tight-knit unit that could defend them if needed. Across the realm, rumors spread like wildfire. The king was dead. The king had set King's Landing aflame. The Lannisters had betrayed the crown. Robert Baratheon was now the king. Each story contradicted the last, but all of them agreed on one point. Rhaegar Targaryen was no more. In those quiet weeks, Rhaegar learned to laugh again. It was always a soft laugh, tinged with sorrow, but real nonetheless. Sometimes Lyanna would tease him about his harp, which he had lost in the chaos of the war. He promised her he would find another someday, and that he would compose a ballad for her. A song that would echo through the ages, celebrating the end of a war and the birth of a new era. He also confessed the fears that kept him awake at night, that the realm would never forgive House Targaryen, that Robert's thirst for vengeance would be unquenchable, that the North would brand Lyanna as a traitor. Whenever he spoke thus, she would lay a gentle hand on his chest and remind him that nothing worth fighting for was ever simple. They would face these trials together. At last, the day came when Rhaegar felt they could wait no longer. News arrived from a wandering messenger that Eddard Stark, Lyanna's elder brother, had journeyed south to King's Landing, only to find the city sacked. King Aerys had been killed by Jaime Lannister, an act that branded him as the Kingslayer in every corner of the realm. The Mad King's blood had run across the floor of the throne room, they said, and still no one knew the fate of the prince because the body was assumed lost at the Trident. Robert Baratheon had taken command of the city in the aftermath, but Tywin Lannister's presence there loomed large. Eddard Stark had left King's Landing in anger and disgust after discovering the brutal murder of Rhaegar's wife, Elia Martell, and their 2 young children. The Lannisters had orchestrated it, presumably to curry favor with Robert by eliminating any possible Targaryen heirs. That news tore a fresh wound in Rhaegar's heart. Elia and his children. His guilt over how he had set them aside for Lyanna was already a secret torment. He had intended to protect Elia and the children, ensuring Dornish ties remained strong. But now they were gone, their lives snuffed out in a cruel betrayal. It was a horror he could scarcely process. He could not bring them back, he could only ensure no more innocents died in his name. Yet the tragedy seared itself into his resolve. He would not allow such atrocities to continue. If Robert Baratheon was king, then justice for Elia and his children must be demanded. If Robert refused, then Rhaegar would show the realm that another king, one who had loved and lost and would not stand for further bloodshed, still breathed. Once Lyanna felt fit enough to ride, they departed the tower under the cover of darkness. The small band that followed them was meager, but each man was loyal to Rhaegar, not to the memory of his father. Arthur Dayne rode beside him, dawn gleaming at his hip. Oswell followed close behind, his stern visage scanning every hill and shadow for threats. Gerald Hightower remained at Lyanna's side, ensuring she was protected at all costs. They traveled northeast, hoping to find sympathetic lords along the way, men who had known and respected Rhaegar before the madness of the war. House Darry, House Mouton, and others in the Riverlands might lend an ear to a living prince, especially if he came bearing truths that contradicted the vile rumors spread by the rebels. They rode mostly at night, taking refuge by day in barns or in the homes of small folk who were too shocked by Rhaegar's presence to turn him away. More than once, Rhaegar found families that had lost fathers or sons to the war. He listened to their stories, offering quiet condolences and what small comforts he could spare. Some recognized his silver hair, stared in awe, and then turned away in bitterness, remembering that it was the Targaryen crown that had brought the war to their doorstep. Others bowed, tears in their eyes, telling him they had prayed for a wise king like him once before the rebellion. Lyanna was never far from his side, moving with a gentle grace that belied her recent recovery. To those who questioned her presence, she spoke candidly, "Yes, I am Lyanna Stark, and Prince Rhaegar is my husband." The shock that followed such declarations often turned to wary acceptance. The realm was too weary for more deceit, and her candor sowed a seed of fragile hope wherever they went. Gradually, a small retinue began to form around them. Knights who had deserted the war rather than break their vows found their courage renewed in the sight of the prince. Commoners who had lost everything under the Mad King's erratic punishments saw in Rhaegar a chance for redemption. Among them was a hedge knight named Ser Harold Flowers, whose entire family had been put to the torch by Aerys for a supposed insult. Harold had once adored Rhaegar's music and refused to believe the prince was cut from the same cloth as his father. When he learned that Rhaegar was alive, he knelt, tears streaking his weathered cheeks, and swore his sword to him, murmuring that he would die 100 times over to see a just king on the Iron Throne. Still, they traveled without any official banner, careful not to rouse suspicion from roving patrols of Robert's men. Robert was now being hailed as the new king by many, and any open challenge to his rule would be met with hostility, especially if that challenge came in the form of a supposedly dead Targaryen prince. Yet Rhaegar knew hiding forever was not an option. The realm needed a king who could unify, not a ghost. As they slowly made their way east, Rhaegar spent long nights speaking in hushed tones with Arthur Dayne, Gerald Hightower, and Lyanna, shaping a plan to reveal his survival when the time would have the greatest impact. They would aim for Riverrun, seat of House Tully, where Eddard Stark was rumored to be visiting, for he was betrothed to Catelyn Tully after Brandon Stark's death. If Rhaegar could speak to Eddard face-to-face, if he could show Ned that his sister was safe and loved, perhaps they could begin mending the chasms of betrayal. Eddard was known to be honorable, perhaps the most honorable man in the Seven Kingdoms. If anyone could be swayed by truth and reason, it was he. Yet the road to Riverrun was long and fraught with dangers. Scouts for Robert's forces were said to comb the riverlands, ensuring no Targaryen loyalists stirred. Rumors of sellswords and mercenaries in Lannister employ circulated through every village. Rhaegar's company had to rely on secrecy, swift movement, and the kindness of lords sympathetic to his cause. The lords who offered them shelter did so at great risk to themselves and their families. Rhaegar did not forget such acts of bravery. He made note of every face, every name, vowing that if he ever claimed the throne, he would remember who had stood by the crown when it had nothing left. They eventually reached the outskirts of Riverrun under cover of night. The castle loomed beside the confluence of the Red Fork and Tumblestone rivers, its banners displaying the Tully fish rippling under moonlight. To approach the gates directly would have been madness, so they secreted themselves in a nearby thicket of willow trees, and Rhaegar sent Arthur Dayne ahead with a quiet missive for Eddard Stark. If Eddard was indeed within those walls, he might at least grant an audience before raising an alarm. The hours that followed were tense, with Rhaegar and Lyanna pacing in the darkness, each lost in fears of how Ned might react. Would he immediately turn them over to Robert? Would he brand Rhaegar a liar and a kidnapper and refuse to see his sister? Lyanna's grip on Rhaegar's arm tightened with every passing minute. But then finally, Arthur Dayne returned with a young soldier bearing House Tully's colors. The soldier looked shaken, but he relayed that Eddard Stark had received the secret message and demanded to see Lyanna at once, but only under the most private circumstances. If Rhaegar's group could slip into the castle via a secluded postern gate, they would be admitted quietly to an antechamber. No one but a handful of Ned's most trusted men would know of their arrival. It was a perilous arrangement, but it was the best hope they had to gain a peaceful audience. Rhaegar took Lyanna's hand, their fingers laced together, and gave her a small nod. This was the moment that would decide everything. They made their approach well after midnight, under heavy cloaks. The water lapped softly against Riverrun's walls, the moon sending pale reflections dancing across the current. True to his word, the young soldier guided them to a small gate rarely used, overshadowed by a hanging wooden platform. Once inside, they were led through a narrow corridor lit by sputtering torches. The walls sweated with damp, and the scent of cold stone made Lyanna shiver. Rhaegar felt her tremble and tried to lend her strength by squeezing her hand gently. The antechamber they entered was modest, with rushes scattered on the floor and a single table in the center. There, by a lone brazier, stood Eddard Stark. He was dressed in plain clothes, his dark hair cropped shorter than Rhaegar remembered from their only brief meeting at Harrenhal when Ned had been overshadowed by his elder brother, Brandon. Now, with Brandon and his father both gone, Ned stood as Lord of Winterfell. He looked at his sister with equal measures of relief and anger shining in his eyes. When Lyanna stepped forward, the torches flickering against her pale features, Ned's stern composure cracked. He rushed to her, enveloping her in a desperate embrace. Lyanna let out a small sob, clinging to him as though she might never let go. Rhaegar, witnessing this reunion, felt a pang of guilt and a flicker of hope. Ned held Lyanna at arm's length, his voice low but urgent as he asked her if she was hurt, if she had been forced to stay with Rhaegar. Lyanna shook her head vehemently, tears shimmering. With a calm she had forged in pain and longing, she explained how she had left with Rhaegar of her own will, how she loved him, and how she believed their union was the realm's best chance for peace. She told him of the Mad King's growing paranoia, of Rhaegar's attempts to restrain his father's cruelty, and of the child she carried. A child who would be half Targaryen, half Stark, a symbol of both ice and fire. Ned's face was as unreadable as a frozen lake. His gaze shifted to Rhaegar, who had remained silent at a respectful distance. The prince stepped forward, removing the cloak's hood to reveal his silver hair and the faint scars that marred his temples and cheek. He spoke quietly, acknowledging that he had betrayed Robert Baratheon by taking Lyanna away, but that he did it out of love and out of the desperate belief in a prophecy that demanded the union of ice and fire. He did not speak long about prophecy. He knew Ned Stark was a practical man, wary of mystical claims, but he expressed his regret that this had sparked such bloodshed. He swore that he had never wished harm upon the North or upon the Starks, that his father's atrocities had shamed him, and he bowed his head, offering Ned the chance to strike him down if that was the only way to end the cycle of violence. For what felt like an eternity, Ned stared at him, face impassive. Lyanna clung to her brother's sleeve, her breath hitching in the silence. Arthur Dayne stood by, hand resting lightly on Dawn's hilt, ready to defend his prince if needed. But Ned Stark, true to his reputation, did not draw his sword. Instead, he asked, "Why did you not trust me, or my brother Brandon, to find a better way? Why did you steal Lyanna from us?" Rhaegar swallowed, struggling for words. He explained that he had believed no lord of the North would have consented to break her betrothal to Robert, a fear that had proven more than justified when war broke out. He confessed he had been driven by prophecy, by the idea that the child born of a Stark and Targaryen might be the savior the realm needed. He admitted the arrogance of it, how it was fueled by the ancient riddles left behind by seers and scholars he had studied. But he also spoke of his genuine love for Lyanna, of her fierce spirit that matched his own sense of destiny. He told Ned that if he could go back and change the way it happened, he would, but they were here now, at the edge of a precipice that threatened to swallow the realm entirely. Ned listened in silence. Finally, he released a slow breath. "I cannot forgive you for the blood spilled, not easily," he said, voice taut. "But if my sister says she went with you willingly, I'll believe her. And if you have indeed cast aside your father's cruelties, perhaps we can prevent more bloodshed." He looked at Lyanna, and then back at Rhaegar, a question burning in his eyes. "What is it you seek here in Riverrun?" Rhaegar's reply was measured. He spoke of wanting to declare his survival to the lords of the Trident and the North, to show them that the Targaryen line did not end in madness. He wanted to negotiate a halt to the fighting, to call upon Robert Baratheon to answer for the murder of Elia Martell and her children, though it was truly the Lannisters who had committed that heinous act. Robert had condoned it by taking the throne with their support. Rhaegar said he sought an audience with those who still valued honor over vengeance, believing that Ned was one such man and that perhaps Hoster Tully could be another. Maybe in a council of honest men they could find a path that did not lead to further devastation. Ned, cautious as a wolf sniffing an unfamiliar scent, agreed to bring Rhaegar and Lyanna before Lord Hoster Tully. But he warned them, if Hoster believed this meeting would bring war to his gates, he might refuse or even attempt to seize Rhaegar to appease King Robert. The risk was great. With that tenuous agreement, the group was led deeper into Riverrun, passing under archways and through torchlit halls. They moved with hushed steps, for they had no intention of letting rumor spread through the castle. Finally, they reached a private solar, sparsely furnished but warm. There, they found Lord Hoster Tully seated by a fire, his brow furrowed. He rose the moment they entered, his gaze raking across the company until it landed on Rhaegar's unmistakable silver hair. A string of expletives escaped the aging lord's lips. He was stunned, to say the least, to see the prince rumored dead standing in his castle. Ned spoke before Hoster could demand an explanation, explaining that Rhaegar wished an urgent audience, one that could change the fate of the realm. Lyanna, standing beside her brother, confirmed that this was no joke or deception, and she spoke as a Stark of Winterfell. Lord Hoster, though clearly angry and alarmed, nodded curtly and demanded they speak their piece swiftly. For the next hour, Rhaegar laid out everything. He acknowledged the crimes of his father, the tragedies that had befallen both sides of this rebellion, and he begged a chance to lead a different kind of regime, one that did not punish the innocent, one that could unite the fractured kingdom. He invoked the memory of Jon Arryn, Hoster Tully's good friend and ally, who had first raised Robert's banner in the name of protecting the realm from the Mad King. But Aerys Targaryen is dead, Rhaegar said softly, holding Hoster's gaze. Let his cruelty die with him. Hoster Tully listened, frowning deeply, and then turned to Ned. You trust this man enough to bring him here, and yet your sister was betrothed to Robert. What say you, Eddard Stark? Shall we heed his words? Ned did not flinch. He looked from Rhaegar to Lyanna, then back to Lord Hoster. He is telling the truth as far as I can judge. Lyanna confirms it. My sister loves him, and she was not taken by force. If there is a chance to spare further bloodshed to end this without more dead on either side, I would see it done. We have lost too much already. Lord Hoster's expression softened, but his eyes still burned with worry. He sank into a seat by the fire, pressing his palms together as if in prayer. If Robert learns I sheltered Rhaegar Targaryen, he will not be pleased. Yet I cannot turn away from an opportunity to end this. The realm is in shambles. The people are weary. I must be cautious, though Tywin Lannister lurks like a vulture, and the Tyrells have not declared their full intentions. One wrong step could bring a host of enemies to my door. Rhaegar inclined his head. If you can arrange a meeting with Robert Baratheon, or at least the lords loyal to him, I will go willingly. I will face him as a living man, not a phantom conjured by rumor. I will accept whatever terms might be put forth, so long as Lyanna is protected and the realm is spared. Hoster let out a heavy sigh. Robert is the new king in the eyes of much of Westeros. He may demand your head, prophecy be damned. But perhaps we can contrive a peace if you surrender any claim to the throne in exchange for your life. At this, Rhaegar's heart clenched, but he maintained composure. He exchanged a look with Lyanna, who lowered her gaze. A quiet sadness seeped into the room. Would all of this end with him sacrificing any chance to repair the Targaryen legacy? Could he do that if it meant saving thousands from the sword? Ned watched them both, then spoke firmly. Robert would want more than that. He would want Rhaegar's head for what he perceives as a betrayal. And yet, if we show him that Lyanna was not stolen, that she is safe and chose this path, it may soften him. If nothing else, we must try. I will write to him in my own hand and ask for a parley. If Robert refuses, we will consider another route. With that fragile plan laid in place, the tension in the chamber did not vanish, but it receded enough for each to breathe. Hoster Tully reluctantly agreed to send ravens to King's Landing or wherever Robert held court and request a secret meeting under a banner of truce. It was a plan riddled with pitfalls, each more perilous than the last. But in that moment, all involved recognized that the alternative was more war and more innocent lives lost. The fire crackled in the silence, casting elongated shadows on the walls as if reflecting the uncertain future that stretched before them. Lyanna pressed close to Rhaegar, exhaustion evident in her posture. He curled an arm around her waist, helping her stay upright. She murmured so softly only he could hear, "We have to believe this can work. Otherwise, what was it all for?" Rhaegar kissed her temple gently, his heart heavy with guilt and hope in equal measure. He whispered back, "We will find a way." In that moment, under the weary gaze of Lord Hoster and Ned Stark, Rhaegar Targaryen felt the weight of an entire kingdom on his shoulders. But he also felt the first stirrings of a possibility, faint as a new dawn of an era in which the realm might finally know peace. Hoster Tully offered them a private suite in one of Riverrun's corner towers while he dispatched ravens to King's Landing. The chamber was sparsely decorated, but after so many nights spent hiding in barns and hedgerows, its thick walls and blazing hearth seemed like a small paradise. Rain battered against the leaded windows that overlooked the tumblestone, and from this vantage, Lyanna could see how high the water had risen. Spring was near, and the snows melting in the high mountains had swollen the rivers. Rhaegar helped her settle onto the cushioned bench by the hearth, carefully draping a blanket over her legs. She was with child far enough along that she tired easily, though she masked her fatigue behind determination. She kept insisting she felt strong, that the baby stirred with life and spirit. Rhaegar did not doubt the child's spirit, he could almost sense it himself. Yet he worried for Lyanna, especially in these tense surroundings where an enemy might strike at any moment. Ned came to them after midday. The circles under his eyes revealed his own anxieties. He had just come from Hoster Tully's Solar, where he had helped craft the letters that would be sent to Robert and to Jon Arryn in the Vale, along with a discreet message to the north. If we are to mend these rifts, Ned said, standing near the hearth, we must be honest. I wrote to Robert that Lyanna is here by her own will, that she is with your child, and that you, Rhaegar, survived the Trident. I promised him the chance to meet you under a truce. Rhaegar nodded, feeling the weight of the risk. If Robert rejected this meeting, or worse, feigned acceptance only to ambush them, tragedy would follow. But in truth, they had no alternative. Thank you, he said, voice subdued. Whatever Robert's reaction may be, we will face it with open eyes. Ned gave a curt nod. Hoster Tully has agreed to hold you as guests for now. But he made it plain that if Robert declares you an outlaw to be seized, the Tullys will have little choice but to comply. They cannot afford open defiance. Riverrun has only just emerged from the ravages of war. You must be prepared. Lyanna looked from her brother to her prince. Robert would never harm me, she said, though her voice quavered with doubt. But I know his anger will burn hotter than dragon fire once he learns the whole truth. I only hope I can make him see reason. Ned's expression darkened. He loved you in his own way. Yet Robert's fury is like a storm. Once it's unleashed, it spares little. That warhammer he carried to the Trident was more than steel, it was the embodiment of his rage. He believed you had been stolen, that you needed avenging. Betrayal cuts deep in a man like him. Rhaegar stood by the window, staring out at the gray sky. He recalled vividly the moment Robert's hammer connected with his chest, the explosion of pain that nearly sent him hurtling into death's maw. We can only hope he will listen to reason. Then, turning to Ned, he added softly, and if he does not, I will not let Lyanna be harmed. I would sooner die than see more blood spilled over our love. Ned's eyes flicked to Lyanna's face, and he gave a small nod. Though his misgivings were plain, he said nothing more on the matter. Instead, he told them that ravens had been sent, and all they could do was wait for Robert's reply. Riverrun was accustomed to long sieges and patient vigilance, so perhaps it was fitting that they'd have to endure this quiet suspense within its thick walls. In the days that followed, Rhaegar and Lyanna did little but pace the tower chamber and take short walks in the courtyard when the weather allowed. Arthur Dayne lingered near the gates, always vigilant, while Gerald Hightower, still hale for his age, kept a closer watch on Lyanna than ever. Hostility and curiosity mingled in the gazes of the castle guard. None dared challenge the King's Guard openly, not with Ned Stark also present, but rumors crackled through the corridors. A tall, silver-haired man wearing a hidden sword on his hip could hardly pass unnoticed. Some whispered that a Targaryen wraith haunted the battlements at night, while others speculated a Targaryen bastard had come to petition Lord Tully for a place at court. The truth was known only to a handful, but tongues wagged all the same. Late one evening, Lyanna woke from fitful dreams. She rose from the bed they shared in the tower chamber, the flickering candlelight causing her shadow to dance on the stone walls. Rhaegar stirred and sat up, worry etched across his features. "What is it?" he asked quietly. She pressed a hand to her belly, trying to steady her breathing. "A dream of a tower by the sea," she said softly. "Waves crashing, salt in the wind. I heard voices chanting, but I couldn't make out the words. Then I saw a dragon breathing ice instead of flame." She shook her head, shivering. Rhaegar rose and draped his cloak around her shoulders. Prophetic dreams had haunted his own youth, though he had not spoken of them in detail to Lyanna for fear of burdening her. "Dreams can be signs," he murmured, guiding her back to the bed. "Or they can simply be fears wearing a guise." He hesitated, then placed his hand atop hers on her belly, feeling the subtle movement of the child within. "If prophecy weaves through our fate, then let it guide us to a better path. You and I will face whatever storms come. Remember that, my love." She exhaled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You and your prophecies," she teased gently, though her voice wavered with lingering unease. "We should let the future worry for itself tonight." Rhaegar nodded, though he couldn't entirely smother the sense of foreboding that gnawed at him. He settled beside Lyanna, cradling her in his arms. Long after she drifted back to sleep, he remained awake, the candle guttering in the darkness, eyes drifting to the single, slender window that looked out upon the moonlit courtyard below. No raven came bearing word from King's Landing for nearly 3 weeks. The air in the tower seemed to thicken with tension. Each day, Ned or Hoster would send a servant to check with the maester, and each day they returned empty-handed. The men who had aligned themselves with Rhaegar, Arthur Dayne, Oswell Went, Gerald Hightower, and a smattering of loyal guards grew restless, uncertain whether Robert would ever respond or if he would simply march on Riverrun with an army. But to march, Robert would need to rally men from the Stormlands and the Crownlands, many of whom were still fatigued from the rebellion. The same was true of the North and the Vale. At last, in the early morning of a gray, blustery day, a raven arrived from King's Landing. Ned brought the sealed parchment to Rhaegar and Lyanna himself, his expression grave. He handed it over without a word. Rhaegar's heart thudded as he broke the seal, scanning the brief message within. To Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. Your words beggar belief, yet out of respect for our old friendship, I will come. The Tully Lord may host us under a banner of truce, so long as you pledge your word that no treachery awaits. I will bring a small retinue, no more than a dozen knights, and you will do the same. If what you claim is true, that Lyanna is unharmed and that Rhaegar Targaryen still draws breath, then I will know how to answer it when we meet. R. Rhaegar read it twice. Robert's signature was brusque, the note itself rife with barely contained fury. But he had agreed to come. That was more than they dared hope. Lyanna exhaled, her hands trembling slightly. Ned watched them both, his own face carved from stone. He means to arrive within a fortnight, Ned said. Hoster Tully has agreed to host the parley in the Great Hall under strict neutrality. We must see to it that no blood is shed, either side would call it treachery. Lyanna said quietly, I must speak with him first. Alone. When Rhaegar and Ned turned to her in surprise, she set her jaw. Let me see him. Let me show him with my own eyes that I am well, that I love R.H. Agar. If he hears it from me, if he truly sees it, perhaps his anger will not consume him. Ned frowned. Robert will not easily be calmed by mere words. He may suspect you've been bewitched or threatened. Rhaegar let out a slow breath, folding the parchment. Yet it may be our only chance to keep this from turning into another battlefield. If you truly believe you can reach him, Lyanna, we will grant you that opportunity. She nodded, though fear flickered in her eyes. Then let us prepare. The next days passed in a feverish rush of anticipation. Hoster Tully doubled the guards on the battlements, refusing to let either side accuse him of lax security. Arthur Dayne and Gerald Hightower exchanged grave words about how to best protect Rhaegar if violence erupted. Rhaegar himself felt torn. On the one hand, he did not wish to cower behind the King Guard, but on the other, he would not risk leaving Lyanna unguarded. Ned insisted on placing some of his own trusted men alongside the Tully Guard to ensure no Targaryen loyalist attempted any subterfuge, though Rhaegar was certain none of his sworn companions would do such a thing. The tension was palpable. The small folk within Riverrun's walls caught wind of an impending meeting and whispered of kings and dead princes walking again. When at last the appointed day dawned, the wind blew cold from the northwest, bringing the tang of distant snow. Word reached Riverrun that Robert Baratheon had been sighted on the main road, accompanied by a small retinue. Rhaegar stood at one of the outer parapets with Lyanna, the wind-teasing strands of her dark hair. They watched as the small group of riders emerged from behind a copse of bare-limbed trees. Sure enough, at the forefront, Rhaegar could see a massive man in plate armor with a great fur cloak thrown over his shoulders. Even from this distance, Robert's presence seemed to swallow the horizon. Ned and Hoster Tully rode out under a banner of truce to greet him. They exchanged tense words that were too far away for Rhaegar to hear. Then slowly, they led Robert's group into the castle gates. From the parapet, Rhaegar felt a pang of memory. He had once counted Robert as a distant companion, if not exactly a friend. Years ago, at tourneys and feasts, Robert's hearty laughter had been impossible to ignore. He had been all boisterous confidence and easy charm until that charm was stripped away by heartbreak, turning him into a creature of wrath. Rhaegar took Lyanna's hand. Stay close, he said. She nodded, a determined set to her lips. They descended to the courtyard. Robert Baratheon had dismounted, removing his helm to reveal black hair curling just past his ears, a full beard shading his jaw. He appeared leaner than Rhaegar remembered, his cheeks hollowed by the rigors of war, yet he seemed no less formidable. His keen blue eyes were full of suspicion as he surveyed every face that approached. With him stood several knights bearing the crowned stag of House Baratheon on their surcoats, as well as a single Lannister man, distinctive with his golden curls. Rhaegar tensed at the sight of that lion sigil. but the knight kept his hand away from his sword, gazing around in equal wariness. Hoster Tully welcomed them in a stiff, formal tone, explaining that the great hall was prepared for their parley. Robert's gaze darted about, evidently searching for someone. Ned stepped forward and inclined his head. "Robert," he said quietly, "thank you for coming." Robert grunted in reply, still scanning the courtyard. Then his gaze froze. Lyanna had emerged from behind a knot of Tully guards, and in that moment, the entire courtyard seemed to hush. "Lyanna," Robert said, voice thick with emotion. She stepped forward. Rhaegar let go of her hand, allowing her to meet Robert alone. The two stood facing each other, close enough that Robert could see the slight curve of her belly beneath her cloak. His gaze traveled from her face down to that sign of pregnancy, and a muscle in his jaw twitched. What is this?" he demanded, voice quavering between anger and disbelief. Lyanna swallowed hard. "It's as Ned wrote to you. I am with child by Rhaegar Targaryen. I left with him of my own accord. I was not stolen." Robert's face turned scarlet. He drew in a hissing breath, fists clenching at his sides. For a heartbeat, Rhaegar feared Robert would strike her or lash out with a weapon, but Robert remained still, trembling. "They told me you were taken," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Brandon died, your father. All those good men. Do you know what your disappearance did to me? I thought." Lyanna spoke firmly, though tears glistened in her eyes. "I know. I am sorry for the pain it caused. But Robert, I was never meant to be your wife. We would not have been happy. You told me once that you loved me, that I was your sunshine, but you loved the idea of me more than the truth of who I am." He looked wounded, as though she had struck him with a dagger. "Is that truly what you believe?" She nodded. "I have no wish to twist the knife. I only need you to see that I was not kidnapped or forced. My father and Brandon did not die because of Rhaegar's doing. It was the Mad King who ordered their deaths. That same Mad King is gone now. But Rhaegar is not his father. He wants peace." Robert let out a ragged breath, turning his gaze toward Rhaegar with smoldering fury. "Peace? After all the blood spilled, he has the gall to say he wants peace." Before Rhaegar could respond, Ned interceded. "We can speak of this in the hall, Robert. Please, let us keep the truce." Robert spat on the cobblestones, his rage shifting between them all, but he reined it in with visible effort. "Fine, show me to this hall. Let's hear what the Dragonspawn has to say for himself." Tension gripped the courtyard like a vice, but the small party moved inside. Torchlight guttered in the corridors, reflecting in the polished suits of armor that lined the walls. Rhaegar walked with Lyanna while Ned and Robert led the way. Hoster Tully followed close behind, clearly uneasy. The knights of both retinues eyed one another warily, hands never far from their blades. The great hall of Riverrun had been cleared of all but a single trestle table and a few seats. At the head of the table, the sigil of House Tully, a fish on a striped field, was draped, symbolizing Lord Hoster's neutrality as host. Servants hovered on the edges, ready to serve wine or ale if asked, but otherwise silent. The only sound was the rustle of cloaks and the echo of boots on the stone floor. Once they stood around the table, Hoster gestured for Robert, Ned, Rhaegar, and Lyanna to sit. Robert snorted and refused the seat, pacing instead. Rhaegar placed a gentle hand on Lyanna's shoulder, encouraging her to sit for her own comfort, and then remained standing as well. His heart hammered within his chest, but he strove to keep his composure. Robert's stare bored into him. "So," he said, voice like distant thunder. "You live? How is that possible? I saw you fall at the Trident. I crushed your chest with my hammer. I felt the impact." Rhaegar's memory flared with the pain of that moment. "You nearly killed me. Another blow would have finished the deed, but loyal men dragged me out of the water. I was gone from the battlefield before the tide turned fully." "Loyal men?" Robert sneered. "I suppose they regret their mercy now that I sit the Iron Throne." Rhaegar's shoulders tensed, but he forced calm into his tone. "I didn't ask for mercy. They acted out of loyalty to me, not to my father. I have not come here to incite further war, Robert. I have come to end it. House Targaryen has paid dearly for its sins. Elia Martell and her children were murdered, my father slain, half the realm in ruins." Robert's eyes narrowed. "Yes, the sins of your father. Aerys Targaryen burned my kin alive, tortured loyal men, threatened to torch King's Landing itself if he lost. Your father was a monster. He was, Rhaegar said, pain flickering behind his eyes. I do not deny it, but I am not him. Then prove it. Robert's voice cracked like a whip. Drop your claim to the throne. Yield. Bend the knee to me, the rightful king, and perhaps I'll spare you. Maybe I'll even spare the child. His gaze flicked to Lyanna's belly. Lyanna went pale. Rhaegar steadied her, searching Robert's face. You speak of being rightful king, yet the crown was won by treachery, he said, keeping his voice measured. Tywin Lannister broke the city's gates, then slaughtered innocents to curry your favor. Elia Martell, my children, they were no threat to you. Yet they were butchered. Do you call that just? Robert exhaled loudly, anger mingling with unease. He had never been entirely comfortable with the manner in which Tywin presented him the throne. But the war of the usurper had been all-consuming. Robert needed powerful allies. War is cruel, he said, as if the words pained him. But your father drew first blood. He forced our hands by murdering your lady mother's kin, by burning Brandon and Lord Stark. He commanded we yield to his insanity or die. You were set to inherit all that madness. I made sure to put an end to it. Rhaegar bowed his head a fraction, a gesture of acknowledgement. I cannot undo my father's crimes, nor can I bring back those who died. But I want a realm free from that cycle of vengeance. Robert, you loved Lyanna once, or so you said. And I love her now. She loves me. This child is both Stark and Targaryen. If you truly care for her, would you condemn us to death for the sake of a crown? Robert's eyes glittered with conflict. His gaze flicked to Lyanna, who met it without flinching. I never wanted you to die, she said softly. I never wanted any of this. But it happened, and I cannot change it. What I can do is ask you to let us live in peace. There is no reason for more bloodshed. You have the throne. If that is what you desire above all, keep it. Rhaegar and I will not march against you. We only want a safe future for our child. Robert's broad chest rose and fell, each breath a struggle. You would bow to me? He asked, voice low. Rhaegar exhaled slowly. His pride flared. Once he had been heir to the Iron Throne, destined to rule the Seven Kingdoms. Yet he remembered Elia's broken body, his children's innocent lives snuffed out, and all the countless souls lost to war. Had his father never existed, had the realm not been drenched in blood, Rhaegar would have sought to reform the monarchy himself, to guide the realm into a brighter era. But the world had changed, and so had he. If bowing means saving thousands more from death, yes, he said quietly. But I will not submit to false charges. I am not my father's shadow. Robert's jaw worked. So you expect me to let you live as, what, a prince in your own right, separate from the throne? You think the lords of Westeros would stand for that? They'd see you as a rallying point for traitors. They'd claim you mean to usurp me eventually. Ned interjected carefully. If Rhaegar swears an oath of fealty and it is witnessed by enough High Lords, myself included, it might dispel such fears. The same vow would extend to the child. You could name them a ward of the crown to be raised loyal to House Baratheon in perpetuity. Lyanna's hand drifted protectively to her abdomen. She looked at Rhaegar with alarm, but then steeled herself. If it keeps our child safe, we will consider it. But Robert, you must also promise that no harm will come to Rhaegar, to me, or to our child. That you will not harass our supporters or continue a hunt for Targaryen blood. If you truly want peace, show it. Robert bristled, looking at his old friend Ned as though for guidance. Ned remained calm, though his eyes betrayed deep tension. You spoke of justice, Robert. Elia Martell and her children were murdered by your sworn men in your name. Will you answer for that? Robert let out a mirthless laugh. Justice for Elia Martell? The Dornish would have me burned if they could. I, the Mountain, did the deed, and Tywin allowed it. But in war, many horrors occur. If I punish the Lannisters, I lose the Westerlands. You think that won't spark another rebellion? A thick silence followed. Rhaegar felt fresh grief rise at the mention of Elia, but he also understood the precarious nature of alliances. The realm was a tinderbox, needing only a spark to erupt again. Perhaps the Dornish can be placated in other ways, Rhaegar said at length. Diplomacy. Reparations. The Mountain must face consequences, or House Martell will never rest. At that, the Lannister knight who stood behind Robert's retinue stiffened. That might turn Tywin Lannister against the throne, he warned. Robert's glare cut him off. Ned pressed on. Vengeance unserved festers into further war. It was Tywin who turned King's Landing into a slaughterhouse, not Robert. If you wish to appear just, your grace, hold those responsible for war crimes to account. Robert grimaced, rubbing his beard. He seemed torn between practicality and principle. And where does it end? He muttered. The realm is full of men who did dark things in my name and in Aerys' name before me. We'd be stringing them up from here to the wall. It ends where we choose, Rhaegar said softly. Or it does not end at all. A hush fell. The crackle of the torches felt deafening. Robert stared at Rhaegar, then at Lyanna, as though measuring the weight of old love against bitter hatred. Slowly he exhaled. I see how it is. You want to goad me into 1,000 new feuds. Is that it? Rhaegar shook his head. No. I only want to bury the old ones. There's a path to peace, Robert, if you're bold enough to walk it. You have the throne, and I do not challenge that. But if you truly wish to be a just king rather than the second coming of a tyrant, you will show leniency to those who lay down their arms. You will punish those who committed atrocities beyond the pale. And you will allow Lyanna and me to live without fear, even if we must swear fealty and confine ourselves to some corner of the realm. Confine yourselves? Robert almost sneered, but the venom had drained somewhat. Where would you go? To Dragonstone? That fortress is under my control now. Rhaegar glanced at Lyanna, who offered him a tentative smile of encouragement. Then let us settle somewhere else, he said, voice calm. Anywhere far from the seat of power, so as not to threaten you. Perhaps we could restore Summerhall, the old Targaryen ruin. It was my mother's dream to rebuild it one day. Or we might go to the north under Ned Stark's watch. We would remain your loyal subjects. Would that satisfy you? Robert bared his teeth in a half-smile that did not reach his eyes. Would anything ever satisfy me? You took Lyanna from me. Yet if she truly went willingly, then my quarrel is with you and the blood of your house that stained this realm. Tell me, do you think a piece of parchment with your oath will soothe the lords who lost sons to your father's flames? To your war? Rhaegar felt a tremor of guilt. No, but it may be the first step. And if you cannot allow that, then end this now. He stood straighter, opening his arms slightly. Strike me down and let the realm see that Robert Baratheon values vengeance over justice. See how many lords will rally to that cause. Time froze. Lyanna let out a small gasp and Ned reached for his sword, anticipating violence. Robert's hand clenched on the hilt of his own sword. His knuckles went white. The knights around them tensed, ready to draw steel. But Robert did not unsheath his blade. Instead, with a low snarl, he released the hilt. Damn you, he whispered. Damn you both. I should kill you. I should. But I can't do it in front of her. His gaze flicked to Lyanna, then away. You want a chance at peace, Targaryen? Fine. You'll kneel before me and swear your life and your child's life to the crown. In return, I'll let you live. I'll allow you to rebuild some ruin if that's what you want. But mark my words, the moment you stir rebellion or give me reason to doubt you, I'll hunt you down myself. Rhaegar bowed his head, relief mingled with a sorrowful acceptance. Lyanna stood quickly, crossing to Robert. To everyone's surprise, she grasped his broad hand in hers. Thank you, she said, tears shimmering in her eyes. I know how much this pains you. But I promise we do not seek to tear down what you've built. Robert stared at her for a moment, seeming lost in memory. Then he pulled his hand away gently. No more talk of the past, he muttered. I'll do what must be done for the realm. Let it never be said that Robert Baratheon was too cowardly to seek peace. Ned gently led Lyanna back to Rhaegar's side. A leaden hush fell as each man grappled with the magnitude of what had just happened. They had forged a fragile accord that might keep the realm from renewed warfare. But it was hardly a joyous occasion. The ghosts of the dead seemed to circle them, unappeased. At last, Robert cleared his throat. So, we set the terms. You bend the knee publicly, and I proclaim an end to hostilities against House Targaryen. For the sake of clarity, I want it known that you renounce any claim to the Iron Throne, and your heirs do the same. Do you agree? Rhaegar nodded gravely. I do. My only request is that my mother, Rhaella Targaryen, be allowed peaceful refuge if she ever returns from Dragonstone or from exile. He still wasn't entirely sure what had become of his mother after she fled King's Landing, though he suspected she might have gone overseas. Robert paused. If she hasn't made any moves against me, I'll not hunt her down. Let her be if she can be found. Rhaegar lowered his eyes. Thank you. Hoster Tully, who had been watching in stark amazement, stepped forward. And how shall we handle the question of those Targaryen loyalists still scattered across the realm? If they rise in rebellion, will you? They'll be dealt with, Robert said flatly. If they accept Rhaegar's surrender, fine. If not, I'll march against them. But I suspect once they learn that Rhaegar himself has yielded, they'll have little reason to keep fighting. The Lord of Riverrun nodded. Then we are decided. Now let us put this in writing. I'll have my maester draft the documents at once. And so it was that, in the great hall of Riverrun, under the watchful eyes of Ned Stark, Hoster Tully, and a collection of knights from both factions, Rhaegar Targaryen renounced his claim to the Iron Throne, swore fealty to Robert Baratheon, and pledged his bloodline to serve House Baratheon as lawful rulers of the Seven Kingdoms. Lyanna bore silent witness, hands folded protectively around her child. Robert stood at the opposite end of the table, arms crossed over his broad chest, watching with something close to disbelief on his face. When it was done, and the parchment stamped with the seals of houses Tully, Stark, and Baratheon, Ned bowed his head in a gesture of solemn relief. "It is finished," he said, though the tension in the air suggested that the true trials might only be beginning. That evening, a small feast was arranged, though calling it a feast felt grandiose. It was more of a subdued supper, with a modest spread of bread, salt, fish from the river, and roast venison. Robert drank heavily, as did some of his men, but the merriment was strained. Hostility and sorrow pulsed beneath the surface, an unspoken reminder that all these lords had faced each other on the battlefield just moons ago. Rhaegar, for his part, barely touched his wine. Lyanna, exhausted by the ordeal, retired early with Ned's help. When she had gone, Robert's gaze flicked to Rhaegar across the table. For a moment, it seemed the new king might speak, but he only raised his goblet, drained it, and signaled for more. Rhaegar's heart twisted. He knew that, in Robert's eyes, he would forever be the rival who had taken the woman Robert believed was his. No alliance could mend that hurt. And yet, for the sake of the realm, they had set aside their swords. Arthur Dayne and Gerald Hightower lingered near Rhaegar, guarding him with quiet, watchful presence. Soon after Lyanna departed, Ned Stark approached the prince. "Let her sleep," Ned said gently, answering the question in Rhaegar's eyes. "She's stronger than she looks, but this was a heavy day." Rhaegar nodded. "Thank you, my lord. And thank you for all that you've done here." Ned's gaze settled on Rhaegar. "I did it for her, not for you," he said, though not unkindly. "She may say she loves you, but if you ever betray her trust, I will not stand by." Rhaegar dipped his head. "I understand." With that, Ned departed, leaving Rhaegar to navigate the strained atmosphere of the hall. Eventually, Rhaegar excused himself as well, slipping away to the tower chamber where Lyanna slept. He found her curled atop the bed, still dressed, the moonlight painting her hair silver. Gently, he removed her cloak and boots, covering her with the blankets. She stirred, blinking awake. "Is it over?" she murmured, voice thick with drowsiness. "It is for now," he replied, stroking her hair. "Robert accepted our terms. I swore fealty to him." She closed her eyes again, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Then let us live," she whispered, almost too softly to hear. "Away from all of this." Rhaegar's chest felt tight as he climbed into bed beside her, gathering her in his arms. "We will," he promised. "We will build a life for ourselves and for our child, somewhere free from ghosts." Yet even as he said it, he sensed that the ghosts of the war were not so easily banished. His father's madness, the horrors of the sack, the murder of Elia and his children all lingered in the realm's collective memory. But for Lyanna's sake, and for the sake of the unborn child who would be the living symbol of ice and fire, Rhaegar steeled his heart. He had bent the knee to Robert Baratheon. Now he would see if Robert would truly keep his word and if the Seven Kingdoms could ever heal from the scars that had been carved into its very soul. In the following days, the new treaty between Rhaegar and Robert was tested. Ravens flew from Riverrun to every corner of the realm, bearing the news that Rhaegar Targaryen had yielded and sworn loyalty to King Robert. The letters included copies of the signed documents, each bearing the seals of Stark, Tully, and Baratheon. The news elicited shock and confusion. Some lords who had held out hope that a Targaryen resurgence might restore the old order felt betrayed by the prince's surrender. Others who had feared a new wave of rebellion greeted the news with cautious relief. Doran Martell and Dorne remained silent, mourning his sister Elia, while Tyrion Lannister, acting in his father Tywin's stead, reportedly expressed satisfaction that the Targaryen threat had been neutralized. Yet not all accepted the new order so easily. Clusters of Sellswords and Hedge Knights who had once fought under Targaryen banners refused to acknowledge Rhaegar's surrender. They considered him a usurper of his own lineage, a man who had abandoned the rightful claims of House Targaryen. Small pockets of dissent began flaring in the Crownlands and parts of the Reach, where old Targaryen loyalties ran deep. To them, Robert Baratheon was the usurper, not the rightful king. Robert, now formally seated on the Iron Throne in King's Landing, responded decisively. He sent the royal forces, led by men like Randall Tarley, to quell these pockets of resistance. The fighting was scattered and minimal, but each skirmish served as a stark reminder that a single treaty could not erase decades of Targaryen rule. Meanwhile, Rhaegar and Lyanna remained at Riverrun under the careful watch of Lord Hoster Tully, waiting on Robert's directives about where they might settle. The plan to restore Summerhall took shape slowly. That old castle, once a Targaryen summer retreat, had burned down in mysterious circumstances during King Aegon V's reign. It stood in the Dornish Marches, near the Stormlands border, a symbolic boundary between the old Targaryen seat in the south and the Baratheon stronghold in Storm's End. Lyanna found the idea oddly fitting. "Let us build something new from ashes," she mused, standing on Riverrun's battlements with Rhaegar. The breeze rustled her dark hair, and she pressed a hand to her belly, which had grown more prominent with each passing day. "I just hope the ghosts there are kinder than the ones we've left behind." He slipped an arm around her waist, silent for a moment. The memory of the old Summerhall tragedy, the day Prince Duncan the Small died, along with King Aegon V, hung in his mind. "We will give it a new name, if we must, or preserve the old, but with new meaning." She glanced up at him, her gray eyes searching his face. "Do you believe Robert truly intends to let us go?" Rhaegar inhaled, letting the crisp air fill his lungs. "He must. If he breaks his word now, he'll appear faithless in the eyes of Ned Stark, of Hoster Tully, and all those who value honor. He needs stability for his reign. But," he trailed off, unable to finish the thought, "what if Robert's hatred overcame his sense of honor?" Lyanna rested her cheek on his shoulder. "If he does break faith, we will not run. We will stand and face whatever comes." He placed a gentle hand atop hers on her belly, feeling the faint flutter of their child's movement. "No one will harm you," he said, voice firm, "or this child." Not long after, a raven arrived from King's Landing bearing Robert's decree that Rhaegar Targaryen and his lady Lyanna Stark be granted the lands of Summerhall in perpetuity, provided they remain loyal vassals to the crown. The letter also stated that, once the child was born, it must be fostered at court for a time to ensure loyalty. That condition made Lyanna bristle, but Rhaegar soothed her. If fostering was the price of peace, they would pay it, but only after a few years, enough time to strengthen their bond with the child before sending it away. Soon, their small retinue prepared to depart Riverrun. Lord Hoster seemed more than happy to see them gone, worried that their presence might spark more rumors or unrest. Ned lingered to help them gather supplies for the journey, and on the morning of their departure, he embraced Lyanna tightly. She buried her face in his shoulder, murmuring that she would miss him. "Write to me," she whispered. "When the child is born, I want you to be the first to meet them, aside from Rhaegar and me." Ned nodded, eyes shining. "I will. Remember, you are always welcome at Winterfell, regardless of the past." Lyanna smiled through her tears and nodded. Then she hugged Ned one last time and mounted her horse, careful with her growing belly. Arthur Dayne, Gerald Hightower, and Oswell went formed around them, their white cloaks marking them as Kingsguard, even if their king now sat on a throne that Rhaegar had forsworn. It struck Rhaegar as both ironic and poignant that these men remained so loyal to him. He suspected some measure of their loyalty stemmed from a sense of duty to Targaryen tradition, which he had just renounced. Yet they had also been his friends, men who believed in his vision for a kinder monarchy. They set off under a cloudy sky, traveling southeast toward the Stormlands. The roads had seen better days, broken wagons and remnants of battle litter still pocked the landscape. Villages showed signs of looting and burned-out hovels. The realm had not recovered from the rebellion, and Rhaegar felt the weight of it pressing on his conscience. Could his choices have prevented all this if he had acted differently in the past? Each night, they made camp in isolated clearings or, when fortune allowed, in the halls of minor lords who grudgingly offered hospitality. More often than not, the local gentry reacted with wide-eyed astonishment to learn the prince they had presumed dead was alive and traveling with Ned Stark's sister. Some were too wary or afraid to ask questions. Others gave them food and lodging without comment, though Rhaegar noticed the mixture of fear and curiosity in their eyes. Arthur Dayne proved invaluable, his calm presence and legendary sword skill deterring any would-be brigands. Oswell went rode at the rear, ensuring no one trailed them. Gerald Hightower, stoic as ever, remained close to Lyanna. The journey was slow, for she tired easily. They stopped often to let her rest, mindful of her condition. Still, they pressed onward. At last, the silhouette of Summerhall's ruins crested the horizon. Even from a distance, it looked forlorn, a husk of blackened stone perched amid rolling green hills. Dense weeds choked the courtyard, and broken towers jutted like jagged teeth against the sky. Lyanna stared at it from atop her horse, her brow knitting. "It truly is destroyed," she murmured, voice quavering with dismay. "How can we rebuild here?" Rhaegar eyed the broken walls, hearing the faint echo of old stories in his mind. He had never been to Summerhall himself. It had burned years before he was born. Yet his father had spoken of it sometimes in his brief moments of lucidity as a place haunted by lost dreams. "We will find a way," Rhaegar said softly. "If the foundations still stand, we can raise new walls. The land here is fertile enough for farmland. There's a stream not far, if I recall." They rode through what had once been a grand gate, now partially collapsed. Moss and vines covered the fallen stones. Inside, the courtyard sprawled wide, littered with debris from the old fire that had consumed the castle. Charred timber beams lay scattered like bleached bones, and the half-intact shells of some rooms hinted at the castle's old grandeur. Lyanna dismounted carefully, wincing as she braced a hand against her lower back. Rhaegar helped her. Arthur Dayne and the others fanned out, cautiously inspecting the ruins. "We'll camp near the old Great Hall," Arthur suggested. "The walls there might provide some shelter from the wind." That first night in Summerhall was grim. They made camp amid the scorched stones, the wind sighing through empty window frames. Rhaegar helped Lyanna settle by the fire, wrapping her in blankets. Once she slept, he wandered through the dark corridors of the ruin, moonlight illuminating the blackened walls like pale ghosts. In his mind's eye, he imagined what Summerhall might have been: graceful arches, gleaming floors, laughter filling the courtyards. He thought of the Targaryen kings who had come here to escape the pressures of King's Landing, to host feasts and celebrations. Yet all of that had been reduced to ash in a single night of tragedy. He paused in what must once have been an inner courtyard, gazing at the crumbling fountain in the center. The water had long since ceased to flow, leaving only a hollow basin. Placing a hand on the cold stone, he closed his eyes, recalling the words he had spoken to Lyanna when they set out. "Let us build something new from ashes." The days that followed were filled with hard labor. The King Guard helped clear rubble and set up a more permanent encampment. They gathered fallen timber to create a rudimentary wall around a portion of the ruin, giving them a sense of enclosure. Villagers from the surrounding hills, upon hearing that a new lord had been granted Summerhall, began trickling in. Some came seeking work, others out of curiosity. Many looked wary upon seeing Targaryen's silver hair, but when Rhaegar introduced himself simply as Rhaegar of House Targaryen, speaking kindly and offering fair wages for help in rebuilding, their suspicions cooled. Slowly, an air of possibility crept into the charred bones of Summerhall. Craftsmen arrived from a nearby town, hired to assess what might be salvaged and what needed tearing down. Gerald Hightower took charge of organizing supplies, while Arthur Dayne oversaw the security of the site, warding off the occasional roving bandit. Oswell went scouted the surrounding lands for suitable farmland and materials. Rhaegar himself labored alongside the workers, hauling stones, clearing debris, and offering words of encouragement. Lyanna helped as she could, though as her pregnancy advanced, her strength waned. She took on a role of advising the workers, mapping out how the new halls might look, which sections of the ruin were stable enough to incorporate into living quarters. Despite her fatigue, she seemed to find new life in shaping the future of this place. Sometimes Rhaegar would find her gazing at the old blackened towers with an almost wistful expression, as if she could already envision them restored. After nearly a moon's turn, they had made enough progress that portions of Summerhall became habitable, if still far from comfortable. Walls had been stabilized. A roof of fresh timbers was constructed over what had once been the kitchen, giving them a dry space to store supplies. Where the Great Hall had once stood, only a few columns and a section of the original floor survived. Yet Rhaegar ordered a large fire pit dug in the center, ringed with stones, so that they could gather there at night, reminiscent of a feasting hall in simpler days. One evening, after a long day's work, Rhaegar sat beside that fire pit with Lyanna. The workers and guards had already turned in, seeking rest in their makeshift tents or the sheltered rooms. Only a few torches flickered along the broken walls, casting dancing shadows across the courtyard. Lyanna leaned against Rhaegar's shoulder, sighing softly. "I think the baby will come soon," she said, voice barely above the crackle of the flames. "I can feel it, the heaviness, the restlessness." Rhaegar nodded, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "I've already asked Gerald to arrange for a midwife. She's supposed to arrive within the fortnight." Concern flickered in his eyes. "Are you afraid?" She drew her cloak tighter around her, looking into the fire. "A little," she admitted. "But also, I feel hope." She turned to gaze at him, her storm-gray eyes warm. "This child will be neither purely Targaryen nor purely Stark. Perhaps that's the key, this union that transcends old grudges. Maybe it is the realm's best chance at healing." Rhaegar's throat tightened. He recalled the old prophecy that had obsessed him in his youth about the prince that was promised, born of the union of ice and fire. Once he had thought that child would be his son by Elia Martell, or that the prophecy might be more metaphorical. Now, as he looked at Lyanna's rounded belly, he felt certain that this child carried a profound destiny. Yet he no longer clung to the prophecy with desperation. Instead, he clung to the simpler truth that life forged in love could conquer hate. He placed a tender hand on her belly, feeling the child move. "Whoever they become, I will love them with all my heart," he murmured. Lyanna's eyes glistened with tears, and she rested her hand atop his, fingers entwining. They fell silent, lulled by the fire's gentle crackle. Above them, the sky stretched endless and star-flecked. A half-moon hung low on the horizon, and a whisper of wind rustled through the half-ruined walls. For a moment, Rhaegar's mind drifted back to the tumult of King's Landing, to the Iron Throne that might have been his. A flicker of regret stirred in him, but he brushed it aside. He had chosen a different path, one that might lead to a future free of the sins that had destroyed his house. He closed his eyes and pulled Lyanna closer, letting the warmth of her presence and the unborn child's gentle stirring quell the regrets. The night air tasted of ash and new beginnings, a strange blend that seemed to mirror their lives. In that quiet moment, under the vastness of the sky, they found a fragile peace, one that, for all its fragility, felt infinitely precious. Summerhall's nights grew colder, and the wind carried the scent of approaching autumn. Over the following weeks, Lyanna's belly swelled further, and the workers redoubled their efforts to carve out a stable home before the child's birth. Rhaegar coordinated the rebuilding with a quiet but determined energy, splitting his time between laboring at the site and riding to nearby villages to trade for supplies. The Kingsguard assisted, though occasionally Ser Arthur Dane or Ser Oswell Went would pause in their labors to remark on the strangeness of it all. Men once pledged to guard the royal family, now hauling timbers and laying stones for a prince who had renounced his crown. Despite the heavy work, glimmers of hope began to surface. A handful of small folk, having lost their homesteads to the chaos of the rebellion, arrived at Summerhall's gates in search of a place to settle. Rhaegar welcomed them, ensuring they had tasks to perform and wages, small though they were, so they might rebuild their lives. He granted them patches of land in the surrounding hills, encouraging them to farm and raise livestock. Soon, the barren ruins gained a lively pulse as families set up makeshift huts and market stalls, children darting around piles of lumber while watchful mothers scolded them not to wander too far. Amid this fragile growth, a traveling bard with ragged clothes and a battered lute made his way to Summerhall. He introduced himself as Perwyn of the Stormlands, claiming he'd heard rumors of a Targaryen prince offering fair wages to all comers. When he arrived, he beheld the half-ruined walls and the bustling activity with wide eyes. The sight of Rhaegar, silver hair unmistakable, caused him to drop his lute in shock. Yet Rhaegar only smiled gently, welcomed him, and asked if he might play a song to lighten the workers' spirits. Word of this small act spread among the laborers, fueling a sense that something new and different was rising from the ashes, something kinder, more rooted in the needs of the common folk. When Perwyn strummed his lute each evening by the communal fire, men and women who had once been too exhausted to speak now laughed and danced, a fledgling community forging bonds in the ruins. Amid these slow but tangible steps forward, Lyanna's time drew near. Her face had grown fuller, her once slender frame carrying the weight of impending motherhood. Maester Alwyn, a soft-spoken man with a balding pate, finally arrived from a distant keep. He set up a small infirmary in a corner chamber they had recently roofed, transforming the barren space into a rudimentary birthing room. His weathered face showed concern at the dusty conditions, but he spared no effort in cleaning and preparing the area as best he could. Fresh rushes were laid, a sturdy bed assembled, and water was hauled daily from the nearest well to ensure cleanliness. Late one afternoon, as Rhaegar supervised the reinforcement of an old tower wall, a panting guard rushed to him. "My prince, it is time," he said breathlessly, a mixture of excitement and alarm on his face. Rhaegar's heart leapt into his throat. He dropped the tools he'd been holding and hurried to the newly fashioned birthing chamber. Already, the midwife, a stern woman named Helia, stood at Lyanna's side, guiding her through waves of pain. Maester Alwyn readied clean cloths and tinctures, his expression intent. Lyanna, propped against a stack of pillows, looked both terrified and resolute, her hair damp with sweat and her lips pressed tight. Rhaegar approached, took her hand gently, and murmured calming words. She managed a tight smile between contractions, telling him she was well, that the baby was eager to meet the world. Her nails bit into his palm during each surge of pain, yet he barely felt it, his entire being focused on her labored breathing, her trembling form. Helia barked orders for fresh water, and Oswell Went, who had never in his life attended a birth, scrambled to comply. Arthur Dane and Gerald Hightower hovered outside like anxious sentries, their usual composure shaken. Hours passed in a fever of tension and prayer. Lyanna's moans rose and fell, echoing in the chamber. She gripped Rhaegar's hand with all her might, tears streaking her cheeks. He brushed the damp hair from her face, whispering encouragement. He recalled ancient verses once read in dusty scrolls, blessings of the mother, the maiden, even the warrior. He spoke them haltingly, weaving them into a soft litany for Lyanna's ears alone. At last, as dusk turned to night, Lyanna let out one final cry. The air swelled with anticipation. Then a thin wail rang out, a child's cry, small yet determined. Trembling with relief, Rhaegar watched as Helia cleared the infant's mouth. The midwife's expression was businesslike, but she handled the newborn with gentle care. Maester Alwyn examined the baby quickly, nodding in satisfaction, before handing the child into Rhaegar's waiting arms. A boy, tiny, red-faced, with a dusting of black fuzz on his head. Tears blurred Rhaegar's vision. He turned to Lyanna, her chest heaving with exhausted sobs, and carefully placed the infant in her arms. The boy's cries softened, replaced by fragile mewling. Lyanna's face shone with awe. "He's perfect," she whispered, running a fingertip along the child's cheek. Rhaegar knelt beside them, pressing his forehead to Lyanna's. He felt his heart swell with emotion so raw it almost hurt. The child was half Targaryen, half Stark, a union of bloodlines that had sparked a rebellion, but which might now be the realm's greatest chance at a new beginning. Lyanna looked up at Rhaegar, eyes shimmering. "What shall we name him?" she asked softly. In old times, Targaryens named sons after kings of legend, Aegon, Maegor, Jaehaerys, Baelor. But as Rhaegar gazed upon this little life, he felt the burden of tradition clash with the desire for a fresh start. Lyanna's lineage called to him, too, with names from the north: Brandon, Eddard, Benjen, Rickon. For a moment, they simply looked at each other in the hush of the chamber. Then Rhaegar touched the baby's tiny hand, which curled instinctively around his finger. "Aemon," he said, recalling the wise old Maester Aemon Targaryen at the wall, known for his humility and foresight. "A name of peace and wisdom, I hope." Lyanna repeated it softly, smiling. "Aemon Targaryen," she murmured, then added with quiet pride, "Aemon of the North as well." Rhaegar's throat felt tight. He bowed his head and kissed the baby's forehead. "Yes," he said, voice trembling, "Aemon of ice and fire." In the courtyard beyond, Arthur Dane heard the infant's cry and let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. He exchanged a relieved grin with Gerald Hightower. Even the workers resting by the fire turned at the sound of new life, smiles breaking across their soot-streaked faces. Rumors had whispered for weeks that the prince's child would be born in this place of ashes. Now that it had finally happened, a sense of wonder rippled through the budding community. The next day dawned bright and crisp. Word spread of the child's name, and folk whispered that Prince Rhaegar had named him after a gentle scholar rather than a conqueror, an omen that perhaps the new generation would not be shackled to old cycles of vengeance. Lyanna recovered slowly, exhausted but content, refusing to let anyone but Rhaegar hold the baby for the first few days. Eventually, she relented, allowing Arthur Dane and the others a chance to cradle the infant. The sight of the fearsome sword of the morning holding a tiny baby, cooing with a faint smile, drew soft laughter from onlookers. Nevertheless, shadows remained. The realm was far from peaceful. Reports filtered in of scattered skirmishes, especially near the Dornish border, where Prince Oberyn Martell raged that justice had not been done for his sister's murder. Robert's attempt to placate Dorne with promises of punishments for Gregor Clegane and others involved had stalled. Tywin Lannister proved unwilling to hand over his knights, and Robert was reluctant to face the Westerland's wrath. Thus, Dorne simmered, threatening revolt if their demands for vengeance went unanswered. Rhaegar worried that their child's birth might be exploited by either side, those who wanted to dethrone Robert or those who wanted to stamp out Targaryen blood entirely. Above all, he feared a clash that might devastate everything they had rebuilt. Yet the baby's presence seemed to fill him with renewed determination. He would stand guard over the fragile peace, forging alliances if he could, and ensuring the safety of his family at all costs. Not long after Aemon's birth, a delegation arrived at Summerhall. Word of Rhaegar's settlement had reached King's Landing, and Robert had decided that his vassal should be inspected, ensuring no subterfuge brewed in the old Targaryen seat. Leading the delegation was none other than Stannis Baratheon, Robert's stern, humorless younger brother, newly appointed as Master of Ships. With him came a retinue of soldiers in Baratheon livery, along with a pair of royal officials armed with parchment and quills for record-keeping. They rode into the courtyard one afternoon, dust clinging to their cloaks. Stannis dismounted stiffly, surveying the partially rebuilt walls of Summerhall with unconcealed disapproval. He was a tall man, lean, with thinning hair and a perpetual scowl. Behind him, a few knights eyed the structure warily, as though expecting an ambush. Rhaegar emerged to greet them wearing a simple tunic that bore the faint outline of a three-headed dragon, less a heraldic display and more a subtle nod to his heritage. Lyanna stood at his side, cradling Aemon, who was swaddled in a warm blanket. Arthur Dayne, Gerald Hightower, and Oswell went flanked them at a respectful distance. Stannis' eyes fell upon Rhaegar and then shifted to the infant in Lyanna's arms. He frowned. "So it is true," he said flatly. "You have a child." Rhaegar inclined his head. "My lord Stannis, be welcome at Summerhall. It is under construction, as you can see, but we offer what hospitality we can." Lyanna, though tired and still somewhat pale from childbirth, met Stannis' gaze with unwavering composure. "Would you like to see the improvements we've made?" she asked, glancing around at the tents and half-finished structures. "Though it is but a shell compared to its former grandeur, we hope to restore something of its old beauty." Stannis sniffed, unimpressed. "We're here on the king's orders to verify the state of your settlement and ensure you are abiding by the terms of your surrender. The realm must be certain you are not gathering armies or stoking rebellion. If everything is in order, we shall not trouble you long." "Of course," Rhaegar replied, keeping his tone cordial. He offered a brief tour, leading Stannis and his men around the courtyard, the remnants of the Great Hall, and the makeshift structures that housed the laborers. Stannis inspected every corner with an eagle's eye, occasionally asking pointed questions about how many men were present, whether they possessed any siege weapons, and if they had corresponded with Targaryen loyalists abroad. Rhaegar answered with calm honesty, explaining they had no such weapons, only a few swords for personal defense, and that they had received no foreign envoys. Eventually, they reached a refurbished chamber in the southwestern corner, one of the few that sported a proper roof. There, Lyanna offered the visitors ale and bread. Stannis refused ale, asking only for water. He sat stiff-backed, his gaze flicking around the space as though expecting hidden passages. Rhaegar, seating himself opposite the Baratheon lord, noted the tension etched into Stannis' features. He decided to confront it directly. "My lord, I have no quarrel with King Robert. I swore fealty in Riverrun, and I meant it. My only wish is to raise my family in peace and help restore order in this part of the Stormlands. If you have any doubt, speak plainly." Stannis regarded him in silence for a moment. Then he spoke in a low, measured tone. "I remember the day news came that you had carried off Lyanna Stark. My brother was mad with fury, promising to kill you. We all believed you were dead at the Trident. Then, as if by some twist of fate, you re-emerge, kneel to Robert, and hide away in these ruins. It seems too convenient. Treachery often comes veiled in fair words." Lyanna bristled, but Rhaegar laid a calming hand on her arm. "I understand your suspicion," he said to Stannis. "The history between our houses is stained with blood. But consider what I have gained by this treachery if that's what you believe. I gave up a crown, lost kin, lost friends, and nearly my life. I have earned no wealth or power by settling here. All I have is my family." Stannis studied him, his glare unsoftened. "And a name that still carries weight among some. Targaryen loyalists might flock to you if you gave the slightest sign of wanting the throne." Lyanna spoke then, quietly but firmly. "He will not call them. We want no more war. My brother, Ned Stark, risked much to make this peace possible. You know his honor. Would he have lied to Robert about us?" At mention of Ned Stark, some of the hardness in Stannis' eyes wavered. He respected Ned, that much was known. "Very well," he said stiffly. "For now, I accept your words. I will report to the king that Summerhall poses no threat. Yet be warned, if my brother suspects any duplicity, I will be the first to bring soldiers to your gate." Rhaegar nodded solemnly. "You have my oath, there will be none." Stannis seemed almost disappointed to find nothing amiss, but he stood to depart all the same. As he strode out, he paused at the doorway, glancing back at the bundle in Lyanna's arms. What is the child's name? Aemon, she replied, voice soft. Stannis gave the barest tilt of his head in acknowledgement. Then he swept away, his soldiers in tow. Rhaegar listened to their footsteps receding into the courtyard. Only after they had ridden off did he allow himself a breath of relief, tension unraveling from his shoulders. In the weeks that followed, more sporadic delegations arrived, typically lesser lords or royal tax collectors checking up on them. Each time, Rhaegar offered transparency and courtesy, showing them the slow but steady progress. The Targaryen sigil might still have lingered in the background on a banner salvaged from the past or etched into old stones, but Rhaegar no longer flaunted any claim. He paid taxes in coin or in grain, contributed manpower to patrolling the local roads, and generally acted like a vassal who wanted no trouble. Robert himself never came. Rumors circulated that the king spent much of his time indulging in feasts, hunts, and merriment in King's Landing, relying on Stannis and his other advisors to handle governance. Some whispered that Robert's thirst for vengeance had cooled, replaced by a growing weariness. Others said he was simply drowning his regrets in wine, unwilling to dwell on the complexities of politics or justice. In either case, Rhaegar could not decide if Robert's absence was a blessing or a concern. Meanwhile, Dorne seethed. From travelers, they learned that Prince Doran Martell had made repeated demands for the head of Rhaegar Clegane, the monstrous knight who had murdered Elia Martell and her children. Robert had refused to yield Clegane, citing the difficulties of defying Tywin Lannister. Unable to gain satisfaction, Dornish houses threatened to close their borders or, worse, to rebel. One day, as autumn leaves began to blanket the hills, a lone rider bearing Dornish attire appeared at Summerhall's gates. He was brought before Rhaegar, who recognized the man, Ser Ryan Sand, a noted Dornish knight of uncertain parentage but undeniable skill. Ser Ryan's dark eyes shimmered with both and anger as he beheld Rhaegar and Lyanna in the half-rebuilt courtyard. He bowed stiffly. "My prince," he said, voice tight with conflicting emotions. "I have come to see if the rumors are true. That you live and that you do nothing to avenge Elia Martell." The words struck Rhaegar like a blow. He had carried the guilt of Elia's fate every day since learning of her murder. "Welcome to Summerhall, Ser Ryan," he said softly. "I did not ask to live while she died. I would have traded places with her if it meant sparing her and our children." Ser Ryan scoffed. "Those are fine words, but words will not bring them back. Nor will they punish the Lannisters. We in Dorne saw you as our prince, the husband of Princess Elia, father to half-Dornish heirs. Your father wed you to her to seal the alliance, and we had faith you would protect her. But you," his gaze flicked to Lyanna, and he pressed his lips into a thin line. "You set her aside for another woman." Lyanna drew breath to retort, but Rhaegar gently squeezed her arm. He answered calmly, "Elia remained dear to me, but the politics of the realm, my father's madness, my own convictions about a prophecy I followed foolishly. It brought ruin upon her. And for that, my guilt is endless." Ser Ryan's dark eyes flashed. "Guilt is not justice, my prince. Nor is rebuilding this ruin. If you will not avenge Elia, perhaps Dorne must do so on its own." An uneasy silence fell. Arthur Dayne and Gerald Hightower exchanged wary looks, well aware that confrontation with Dorne could reignite a greater conflict. Lyanna cradled baby Aemon, who fussed at the tension in the air. Rhaegar closed his eyes for a moment, choosing his next words carefully. "Dorne has every right to seek justice," he said. "But if you ride against the Lannisters without the king's sanction, you risk plunging the realm into another war. Thousands more will die. Prince Doran must know this." Ser Ryan snorted. "Prince Doran knows. He also knows that no justice is forthcoming from King Robert's court. The Lannisters hold too much power. Your father's madness, your marriage, these things opened the door for Tywin Lannister to butcher innocents, and now he stands unchallenged." Rhaegar's voice trembled. "I will never forgive him for what he did, but I cannot bring justice alone. Nor can Dorne. Only if other lords unite to demand Rhaegar Clegane's stand trial might it succeed. But as you say, Tywin Lannister's grip is strong." Ser Ryan stared at him a long moment, then gave a curt nod. "I see. My prince, I understand you surrendered to Robert. Perhaps you think that is the only path to peace. But remember this. The people of Dorne do not forget their murdered kin. If justice is denied, hatred will fester. If you truly regret Elia's fate, do not turn your back when the time for reckoning comes." With that, he bowed again, albeit stiffly, and departed, leaving Rhaegar with a hollow ache in his chest. Lyanna reached for his hand, but he gently pulled away, walking alone into the half-finished hall. Memories of Elia's laughter, the soft tilt of her head, haunted him. He recalled the guilt he'd felt when he set her aside for Lyanna, promising her that she and the children would remain safe. Promise he could not keep. Now Dorne demanded retribution for a crime that went unpunished, and Rhaegar was powerless to grant it. He paced the dusty floor, fists clenched. He had chosen peace, but at what cost? Lyanna found him there, baby Aemon bundled against her shoulder. She said nothing, only stood close, letting him sense her presence. After a moment, Rhaegar spoke quietly. Elia deserved so much better. I failed her, Lyanna. How can I dare speak of a new future while I let her killers go free? Lyanna's voice was tender, though threaded with sorrow. You are not letting them go free. The realm's politics, Robert, Tywin, the lords who fear another war, they are the ones letting her killers go free. You renounced the throne. You can't change that now without sparking another rebellion. He turned, gazing at her and the child. Am I a coward? He asked, anguish in his eyes. I renounced my crown for peace, for you, for Aemon. But perhaps that was only my excuse to escape responsibility. Lyanna shook her head. Sometimes living with guilt is harder than dying for a cause. You are not a coward, Rhaegar. You are trying to protect what remains, to build a better world for our son. Elia's memory deserves justice, but can you deliver it without unleashing the chaos we barely survived? He closed his eyes, exhaling shakily. The old prophecy he once clung to, about the prince that was promised, felt distant now, overshadowed by the raw complexities of the realm's wounds. If he tried to rally men against the Lannisters, Robert would brand him traitor, and civil war would ignite anew. If he did nothing, Dorne's anger might eventually burn the realm anyway. Arthur Dayne approached, having stood at a respectful distance. He spoke gently, his voice carrying the quiet dignity of a Kingsguard. My prince, you chose to yield for the sake of thousands. Yet your heart is torn for Elia. Perhaps there is a middle path, one that does not require you to break your oath or remain silent. You could speak with Prince Doran, urge him to seek a formal trial through the king's justice. Though it may fail, at least you would stand with Dorne in calling for it. Robert cannot ignore you entirely, especially if Eddard Stark supports it. That suggestion lit a spark in Rhaegar's mind. If Ned Stark, champion of honor, joined with Dorne to demand Rhaegar Clegane face judgment, Robert might relent. Tywin Lannister would snarl, but Robert's alliance with him was not born of love, only convenience. Perhaps pressure from multiple great houses would force the issue. It was tenuous, to be sure, but it was a path that did not involve open rebellion. Lyanna nodded, seeing Rhaegar's expression shift. Yes, write to Ned, she said. He will at least hear your plea. And if he stands with you, he may convince Robert. Ned detests needless slaughter. Rhaegar felt a wave of gratitude. He pressed a gentle kiss to Lyanna's forehead and then to baby Aemon's downy head. You see a path where I saw none, he murmured. Arthur smiled slightly. She is a Stark. Stubbornness is in her blood. That evening, Rhaegar penned 2 careful letters, one to Prince Doran Martell in Sunspear and another to Eddard Stark in Winterfell. He chose his words with precision, acknowledging that he did not hold power but was willing to add his voice to the call for justice. He proposed that House Stark and House Tully, both intimately connected to the new royal family by marriage, join forces with House Martell in petitioning King Robert for a trial of the men responsible for Elia Martell's murder. He did not name Tywin Lannister directly but made clear that his complicity could be addressed should new evidence arise. When the letters were complete, he sealed them with the sigil of House Targaryen, an act that felt both hollow and defiant, and gave them to 2 trusted writers, each escorted by a Kingsguard knight to ensure safe passage. Then he prayed to the 7, despite wondering if they had any ear for Targaryen prayers, that this delicate move would not unravel what little peace they had built. Over the next moon's turn, life at Summerhall continued in its slow, deliberate rhythm. Lyanna nursed Aemon, doting on him even as she resumed her role in overseeing construction. The child thrived, laughing at the flicker of torchlight on the stone walls, grabbing at people's fingers with surprising strength. Rhaegar took to carrying him in a cloth sling while he and the workers inspected new sections of masonry, smiling ruefully at the men's good-natured jests that the little lord was keeping watch over their efforts. As for the letters, no response came for many weeks. Rhaegar tried not to fret, though each passing day gnawed at him. Would Doran Martell see him as a hypocrite, refusing to accept his entreaty? Would Ned remain silent for fear of angering Robert? Or were their messengers simply delayed? At last, on a day when the air held the crisp tang of approaching winter, a raven arrived from Winterfell. Ned's reply was brief, but it hardened Rhaegar. Prince Rhaegar, your letter reached me safely. I understand your desire to see justice done for Princess Elia Martell, and I share that sentiment. However, I caution you that my standing at court is precarious. Robert remains haunted by the war and all that transpired. Still, I will lend my voice where I can, though I advise patience. If we move too quickly, we risk turning Robert's anger upon us, which would serve no cause well. My sister and your son have my continued support and love. May the gods watch over your household. Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell. Rhaegar read Ned's measured words with mingled relief and apprehension. Ned was not rejecting him, but he also wasn't rushing into confrontation. Perhaps that was for the best. Still, he yearned for news from Dorne. Would Doran Martell be willing to join this careful push for justice, or was he planning something far more dramatic? The answer came in late autumn when another Dornish messenger arrived, this time bearing a letter from Prince Doran. Rhaegar received the scroll in the partially rebuilt courtyard, where a brazier had been lit to ward off the chill. Lyanna, Arthur Dayne, and Gerald Hightower stood with him, curiosity in their eyes. Breaking the seal, Rhaegar's gaze flicked across Doran's precise handwriting. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, you live and you write to me of justice. My heart has been heavy since the murder of my sister and her children. I have waited, believing that calm hearts must prevail before rash actions are taken. Yet King Robert has given us no satisfaction and Tywin Lannister remains untouchable. We in Dorne have not forgotten. If you can truly unite voices from the north, the Riverlands, and any other regions willing to stand for justice, I will accompany you in petitioning the king to demand a trial for Ser Gregor Clegane and those who abetted him. But be warned, my prince, if the king rejects this petition and declares any attempt at retribution treason, Dorne will not bow meekly. We shall not fight for you, but for Elia's memory if forced. I trust you understand this difference. Should you be sincere in your regret for my sister's fate, then prove it by ensuring your allies do not waver. I will wait to hear news of your preparations. May the seven guide us. Doran Nimrose Martell, Prince of Dorne. Rhaegar finished reading, heart pounding. He handed the letter to Lyanna, who scanned it quickly, her brow furrowing. Arthur Dayne, a Dornishman himself, cleared his throat. Prince Doran was always measured in his actions, but beneath that calm, the Martells burned hot. He's willing to try a lawful path for justice, but if it fails, we could face war again, Lyanna finished quietly, holding baby Aemon a little tighter. Rhaegar let out a heavy breath. We stand at a crossroads. If we do nothing, Dorne may rebel alone. If we act and fail, we risk bringing Robert's wrath upon us. But if we succeed, at least in forcing a trial, we might finally lay Elia's spirit to rest and perhaps truly mend the realm. Arthur nodded, eyes somber. Decide carefully, my prince. The next steps must be planned with caution. Rhaegar gazed at the ruined walls of Summerhall, at the scaffolding and piles of stone that symbolized his own efforts to rebuild. Elia's face flickered in his mind, as well as the memory of her gentle laughter, and he could almost see her ghost among the charred beams. He squared his shoulders. We must try, he said softly. It's the only way forward. In the weeks that followed, Rhaegar wrote again to Ned Stark, detailing Doran's stance and urging that House Tully, House Stark, and possibly House Arryn join in a formal petition to the king. Hoster Tully's involvement might be secured through Ned's influence, or perhaps through the memory of how Tywin Lannister had sacked King's Landing during the war. Jon Arryn, Robert's foster father, might also support a lawful trial if convinced it would prevent future unrest. Rhaegar prayed that these combined voices would sway Robert. But as each raven flew out from Summerhall, Rhaegar felt a deeper unease gnawing at him. The realm was still fragile, and only a single spark could set it aflame again. Every step he took, whether ignoring justice or pursuing it, risked a conflagration. Lyanna sensed his inner turmoil, offering quiet reassurances. Sometimes, when baby Aemon dozed in her arms, she would speak to Rhaegar about the future they still could shape. We have come this far, she would remind him. We have survived a war, confronted Robert, and built this place from ruins. If we can endure that, we can face whatever lies ahead. At last, the day came when Ned Stark's raven arrived bearing more definitive counsel. Lyanna waited anxiously as Rhaegar broke the seal in their modest tower chamber. Reading it, he felt a flicker of cautious hope. Prince Rhaegar. Hoster Tully agrees that the crimes at King's Landing demand justice, and Lord Jon Arryn also believes that the rule of law should be upheld. They are willing to help present a united front to Robert in King's Landing, demanding a formal trial. However, They insist this be done carefully, with no hint of rebellion. I will speak on your behalf, as well as on behalf of Princess Elia's memory. If Dorne stands ready to press the matter, we must show Robert that refusing would only breed more hatred. I will travel to King's Landing at the turn of the new year to meet with Lord Arryn and Lord Tully. Pray for wisdom from the king, and keep Lyanna and your child safe. Eddard Stark. Rhaegar shared Ned's letter with Lyanna and Arthur Dayne. All concurred that this was the best possible chance. Doran Martell will join as well, Arthur said. We should send him word that the meeting at court will happen, so he can be present. Rhaegar agreed. Yes, if the major lords stand together, even Tywin Lannister can't dismiss us easily. And Robert might recognize that justice is in his own interest to prevent more uprisings. So began the next step, informing Doran Martell that the time had come for a formal petition before the king. It was decided that Rhaegar would not go personally, for his presence in King's Landing would be too incendiary. Instead, the plan was for Doran, Ned, Hoster Tully, and Jon Arryn to present the case, each representing a different region of the realm. Rhaegar, having no official seat on the small council, could do little in the capital aside from remind everyone of old wounds. Yet the anxiety of waiting wore on him. He busied himself with tasks at Summerhall, supervising new roofing, clearing fresh farmland, holding court for local disputes, and doting on Aemon whenever he could. Lyanna joined him in these duties, forging a careful balance between her Stark heritage and her life as a Targaryen's wife. Some villagers still gave her curious looks, uncertain what to make of the northern girl who had once been rumored kidnapped by the prince. But her kindness and forthright manner gradually melted their suspicions, and her role as mother seemed to ground her in their eyes. She became Lady Lyanna, a presence both regal and approachable, and the small folk of Summerhall began to look upon her with genuine affection. Arthur Dayne and the other Kingsguard continued to protect them, though no immediate threats surfaced. Stannis Baratheon sent another envoy to ensure no new Targaryen loyalist forces had gathered. They left satisfied that Summerhall remained a place of quiet reconstruction. All seemed poised on a knife's edge, waiting for news of how the formal petition at court might unfold. Winter's first storms came late that year. Though snow did not often fall in the southern stormlands, colder winds and freezing rains battered the half-rebuilt walls of Summerhall. Workers huddled around fires in the evenings, grateful for the partial roofs that now shielded them. Rhaegar and Lyanna remained mostly indoors with Aemon, entertaining him with simple wooden toys carved by the locals. The child babbled happily, oblivious to the political tempest brewing in the wider realm. As the New Year's turn approached, ravens brought word that Ned, Doran Martell, Hoster Tully, and Jon Arryn had indeed gathered in King's Landing, each lodging in separate wings of the Red Keep. They awaited an audience with Robert to present their united petition. The tension at court was said to be palpable. Tywin Lannister had not yet arrived, but his agents lurked, and the presence of Rhaegar Clegane's supporters stoked fear among the courtiers. Rumors abounded that Robert was in a foul mood, dreading any push that might strain his fragile alliance with Tywin. Some whispered that the king was more often found in his cups than on the throne. Then, one stormy evening, another raven fluttered into Summerhall. Rhaegar's pulse quickened when he recognized Ned Stark's handwriting, scrawled in haste. Prince Rhaegar, we have pressed the king for a formal trial of Ser Rhaegar Clegane, naming him responsible for the murder of Elia Martell and her children under Tywin Lannister's orders. Prince Doran spoke eloquently of Dorne's grief. Lord Hoster Tully reminded Robert of Tywin's brutal sack of King's Landing. Lord Arryn appealed to Robert's sense of justice. The king, however, hesitates. He fears angering Tywin Lannister will collapse his hold on the realm. Yet with 4 great houses united in this request, he cannot dismiss us easily. He has granted us a hearing in front of the royal court in 3 days' time. We will argue for Ser Rhaegar's arrest and trial. Tywin is not yet here, but he is expected soon. Tensions rise. Pray that the king chooses wisely. Eddard Stark. Rhaegar clenched the parchment, his chest tight. This was the moment. If Robert had granted a hearing, it meant there was a chance. But if Tywin arrived and turned Robert against them, the petition might fail and Dorne would be incensed. All of Westeros would teeter on the brink once more. Those 3 days dragged like a year. Rhaegar found himself pacing at night, unable to sleep, imagining the shifting alliances in the Red Keep. He could only hope that Ned, Doran, Hoster, and Arryn would stand firm and that Robert, beneath his bluster, still harbored some respect for the rule of law. At last, on a cold, clear morning, another raven came. The guards who delivered it to Rhaegar saw the prince's anxious expression and lingered in anticipation. Lyanna stood beside him, Aemon gurgling in her arms. Breaking the seal, Rhaegar read, "Prince Rhaegar, it is done. Before the assembled court, we pressed our case. Prince Doran recounted Elaya's final hours and demanded Rhaegar Clegane's stand trial for war crimes. Lord Hoster Tully supported this, reminding Robert of the horrors Tywin's men inflicted on the city. Jon Arryn argued that a refusal to try Rhaegar would imply that no lord is bound by the king's laws. I spoke of honor and how the North remembers the horrors of King Aerys's cruelty, reminding Robert that to let Tywin's cruelty go unpunished would be little better. Tywin Lannister arrived mid-proceedings furious. He denied any responsibility, claiming Rhaegar acted on his own in the chaos of war. Yet the weight of 4 great houses cannot be dismissed. Robert wavered, but in the end he agreed to place Rhaegar Clegane under arrest for trial. Tywin stormed out, threatening dire consequences. The king, emboldened by our unity, ordered that Rhaegar be seized and brought to King's Landing. He swore an impartial trial before the royal judges. The realm trembles, for if Tywin resists, we risk open conflict. But for now, the king has chosen justice. Prince Doran sails for Dorne with cautious hope. Hoster Tully and Jon Arryn remain here to ensure Robert does not waver. I will soon return to Winterfell carrying news of this outcome. We have done what we can. Eddard Stark. A tremor of relief and apprehension coursed through Rhaegar as he lowered the parchment. He read the letter aloud to Lyanna, who closed her eyes, clutching Aemon close. Arthur Dayne, listening nearby, nodded gravely. A significant step, he said, but it could spark war if Tywin resists. Will he truly let his sworn knight be tried? Rhaegar sighed. Tywin Lannister is cunning. He might sacrifice Rhaegar Clegane to maintain power, or he might defy the order outright. If that happens, Robert will have to enforce his royal command, lest he appear weak. And if Robert fails, Dorne will revolt. All rests on the next moves from Casterly Rock. Lyanna gazed at their son, worry creasing her brow. No matter what happens, we must protect Aemon. If war reignites, we might be safer behind strong walls. Rhaegar gently stroked her hair. We have spent so long rebuilding this place. But if war truly comes, Summerhall's walls may not suffice. Let us pray it does not come to that. Word soon reached them that Robert had publicly declared Ser Rhaegar an outlaw until he submitted for trial and a royal bounty was placed on his head. This caused an uproar in the Westerlands, with some lesser lords loyal to Tywin Lannister denouncing the decree. Tywin himself issued a scathing denial of Rhaegar's crimes under his orders but stopped short of outright rebellion. He pulled back to Casterly Rock, sending only vague reassurances to King's Landing that he would look into the matter. Tense moons followed. Snow fell lightly in the Stormlands, an unusual sight that coated the half-rebuilt towers of Summerhall in white. Every day, Rhaegar expected a raven announcing war. But it did not come. The Lannisters seemed caught in a dilemma too powerful to be pushed easily, but not strong enough to face the combined wrath of the Crown, Dorne, the North, and the Riverlands all at once. Meanwhile, Robert, likely prodded by Ned and Jon Arryn, refused to rescind his demand that Rhaegar face trial. At last, rumors spread that Rhaegar Clegane, that monstrous knight, had vanished. Some said he'd fled the Westerlands for the disputed lands across the Narrow Sea. Others claimed he still lurked in the mountains, gathering sellswords to strike at Dorne. The truth remained elusive. But for the moment, the realm did not descend into open war. Tywin Lannister had lost face, and a measure of justice, however incomplete, had been served for Elaya's murder. When the snows melted and the roads cleared, Ned Stark returned to Winterfell, sending a final raven to Summerhall. He wrote that the outcome, though imperfect, was the best they could have hoped for without tearing the realm apart anew. He counseled Rhaegar to remain vigilant, for Tywin was not a man who forgot humiliation. Doran Martell, for his part, privately expressed gratitude that the crown had at least acknowledged Elaya's murder as a crime. It was small solace for Dorne, but better than nothing. For Rhaegar, each passing day felt like a gamble. The tension gradually eased, but the potential for chaos remained. In the midst of it all, Summerhall thrived. More farmland was cleared, more families arrived, and the walls rose higher. Lyanna's laughter, once so rare, filled the courtyard when little Aemon toddled across the stones, chasing after scrawny kittens. A new hall, built of freshly quarried stone, took shape where the old Great Hall had been, its rafters tall and proud. Sometimes at twilight, Rhaegar stood on the half-finished parapets, cradling Aemon, gazing over the land they had claimed from ruin. Despite the realm's lingering uncertainty, he felt a fragile peace in those quiet moments, the sense of a future that just might be different from the cycle of blood and fire that had characterized House Targaryen for so many generations. One night, as the new moon hung low in the sky, Rhaegar found Lyanna near the old fountain in the courtyard. The fountain was still dry, though stonemasons had partially restored it. Lyanna was running her fingers along the carved edges, seemingly lost in thought. He approached softly, slipping an arm around her waist. She leaned into him, her breath visible in the cool night air. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, almost too quietly. "All that we sacrificed. Your crown, your legacy, even your chance to claim vengeance for your family. Sometimes I wonder." He knew what she meant, that he had set aside the role he was born for, the destiny once hammered into him by prophecy and blood. "I regret many things," he said, voice low. "Elaya's fate, the lives lost in the war. But not this. Not you, not Aemon, not this place we're building. I was born to be a king, or so I was told. But I think the realm needs something other than another king spouting fire and blood." She smiled, eyes glinting. "You speak more like a father than a prince." He pulled her close, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. "I am a father, and I'd sooner raise a son who knows peace than rule a kingdom built on ashes." They lingered there, the night wrapping them in quiet. Far above, the stars shimmered over the dark silhouette of the reborn castle. A gentle breeze rustled through scaffolding and half-built corridors as though the stones themselves were breathing. In that hush, Rhaegar felt an odd gratitude for the second chance he'd been given, snatched from death's jaws at the Trident, carried by loyal men to a place where he could begin anew. And he felt certain that, in time, the realm would heal as well, scarred but not shattered, if only enough hearts chose reconciliation over revenge. When at last they turned to go inside, Lyanna paused. "It's strange, isn't it?" she murmured, touching the fountain's cool stone. "How close we came to destroying each other. North and south, dragon and wolf. And yet, here we are." He nodded. "Aye. The gods must be either kind or cruel in their designs." She gave a soft laugh. "Kind or cruel, maybe both. But I'll be grateful for it either way." Hand in hand, they returned to their chambers, where Aemon slept soundly under a blanket crocheted by one of the local women. The flickering candlelight illuminated the simple furnishings: a table, a trunk, a modest bookshelf, and a small crib for their son. As Rhaegar extinguished the candle, he thought of how this scene would have been unimaginable just a year or two prior. And he silently vowed, as he did every night, to protect these precious moments against all the storms that might come.